According to the World of Football Manager 2024, Manchester City are the club with the biggest reputation in world football. With Pep Guardiola as manager, Manchester City would win 4 Premier League titles in a row, the Champions League, and both domestic cups across a 4-season span. These feats mean that FM24 give Manchester City a reputation score of 9,400. With that reputation score, it means that Manchester City should be able to sign 99.9% of the database with ease, have the best pick of all of the staff available, build their infrastructures to an elite level, and also sign mega money deals to boost their income. On the other hand, Warrington Town and Weymouth are relatively small English clubs in comparison to Manchester City. Warrington play their football in the Vanarama National North and have a reputation score of 2,250. Weymouth play their football in the Vanarama National South and they have a reputation score of 2,600. Clubs in the lower leagues of English football often struggle to make an impact due to the fact that their reputations are too low to compete. This gave me some inspiration for an experiment video. What would happen if magically overnight both of these clubs became the highest reputation clubs in the world? In today's experiment video, I'm going to crank both teams' world reputations up to the max as I give each team a reputation score of 10,000. I'm going to track both clubs across 10 seasons to see which of the two clubs will put their newfound fame to the best use. Which of the teams will invest their money into their infrastructure? Which of the teams could use their maximum reputation to sign the biggest sponsorship deal? Could we see Mbappe in a Warrington shirt? Or maybe even Vini Jr in a Weymouth shirt? Let's take a look at what happened. It is now June the 2nd, 2025. I've seen forward to the end of Season 1. After the first season, Warrington have decided to stick with their original manager. Paul Carden would be in charge till the end of the first season at least. Looking through their key players, club captain is Josh Amis. Femi Aziz will be their key player, and their hot prospect would be Matteo Easton. Must be a hard knock life for a Scottish 16-year-old with a beard like that. Looking in the top left-hand corner, we can see they haven't invested in their infrastructure at this point. They have a poor training facility, basic youth facilities, fairly basic academy coaching and basic youth recruitment. If we go and look at the finances of the club though, we can see that they were hanging around the £6 or £5 million mark for most of the season, and then in May of 2025 they would get a cash injection, maybe cashing in on their newfound fame to sign a big money sponsor. They would go up to £24.6 million and as of this moment have a £21.8 million bank balance. Did they use any of that money to sign players? Yes, they did. They signed 10 players on a permanent deal and they paid cash for 2 of them. The first of which was Femi Aziz, who would end up being the club's key player. They would pay £400,000 up front to Millwall, and the other player that would come in would be Owen Farmer. They would pay £85,000 for him from Wolverhampton Wanderers. Looking at their league performance, they would finish 6th in the Vanarama National North. They would play 46, win 23, draw 8, lose 15 and finish on 77 points. Now they were a long way behind Telford, who got 113, but the rest of the league is quite compressed with just 11 points between them. Finishing 6th in the league would put them in the playoffs, where sadly they would only get through to the first round, losing to Scunthorpe. Over at Weymouth, they too would choose to stick with original manager Mark Molesley until the end of the first season at the very least. Looking at their key players, their club captain is Tom Bearwish, their key player is Sam Byram, and their hot prospect is 15-year-old Ewan Perrett. Looking in the top left-hand corner, they too would choose not to invest in their infrastructure at this stage. They still have basic training facilities, basic youth facilities, adequate academy coaching, and basic youth recruitment. Looking at the finances at this stage, like Warrington, they would be stable across the season until an injection of cash right at the very end would pump them up to £37 million. Maybe they too would cash in on their newfound fame to get a big money sponsor. They have an overall balance of £36.8 million at this point. Turning that into transfers though, they wouldn't spend a single penny and they would only sign 3 permanent deals in Season 1. The biggest name of which would be Sam Byram, as the former Leeds United and West Ham player would end up playing for Weymouth. Dominic Gape would also join the club, and Bentley Muscat would be another one who would sign on, a 17-year-old new gen. So, that's the transfer policy. How did it transfer to their league form? Well, they would finish in third place in the league. And unlike in the Vanarama National League North, where there was a runaway winner, this league was quite condensed. Weymouth would actually only finish 2 points off of being champions. They would finish level on points with Boreham Wood to go into the playoffs. Looking at the playoffs then, they would go into the semi-final straight away, where they would beat Billericay 2-1 in extra time. And then in the final, it would be a hard-earned 1-1 draw that would go all the way through to penalties, and Weymouth would go on to get promoted to the Vanarama National League. So after season 1, it would be Warrington that would spend the most money, but they would cruelly miss out on promotion in the playoffs, whereas Weymouth didn't spend any money and they got promoted to the Vanarama National League. What will happen in season 2? At the end of the second season, Warrington have still made the decision to stick with original manager Paul Carden. Their key players are now club captain Tunji Akinola, key player is Femi Aziz, and their hot prospect is still Matteo Easton. Looking in the top left hand corner, they have decided that for season number 2 it's still not the right time to invest in their infrastructure. Looking at the finances to see how the cash has been going, so since June of 2025 they would go on a bit of a spending spree as the money would decrease all the way down to £2 million before jumping back up to £17 million as they must have cashed in on another sponsorship deal. As of the end of season 2, they have £14.6 million in the bank. Looking at their transfers across the season, they would only spend cash on 2 players, but they would sign 14 first-team players. The biggest name that they would sign would be Tony Springett. The Irish striker would move from Norwich City for £2.2 million, and they would also sign Eliza Mayenda from Sunderland. They would end up paying £625,000 for him. The other interesting name to look at is Levi Lang. He would come from West Ham. So with such heavy investment in the playing squad, did it translate across to success? It did indeed. Warrington would go on to win the Vanarama National League North, and they would do it in style. They would finish on 117 points from 46 games, and they would now be heading to the Vanarama National League. Over at Weymouth, they too would stay loyal to their original manager Mark Molesley. He sees out another season in charge at the club. Looking at their key players, their captain would be Dominic Gape, their key player would be Gabriel Biancheri, and their hot prospect is Jorge Ortiz. Looking in the top left hand corner, they become the first of the 2 clubs to start investing in their infrastructure. They now have 2-star adequate training facilities, 1.5-star youth facilities, average academy coaching and basic youth recruitment. Looking at the finances at the club, just like over at Warrington, they would start off with that lump sum that they got invested at the end of last season and slowly decline it all the way down to 16 million. But they too would also have another lump sum invested in the club, hopefully via a sponsorship deal as they cash in on their fame. Looking at the overall balance, £52.4 million is what they have going into season 3. Looking at their transfer policy, they too would sign 14 first-team permanent players. They would put the most money into Kevin Nisbet. He would come from Millwall and they would pay £625,000 up front. They would pay for Caden Rodney. He would also come from QPR for £450,000. There are a few other interesting names further down the list. Fabio Tavares, former Coventry player, and they would start to build themselves a squad that is capable of getting out of this league. So, did they manage it? They unfortunately did not. They would finish second in the league, finish 5 points behind league winners Forest Green, and finishing on 92 points in second place would put them in the playoffs. They would go straight into the semi-finals where they would beat Yeovil to get to the final, and unfortunately for them, they would come up against Rochdale and they would lose 2-1 in the playoff final. In season 2, it would be Warrington that comes good after investing in their playing staff, finally gaining promotion to the Vanarama National League. Weymouth, on the other hand, heartbreak at not getting back-to-back promotions. Both teams are in the same division for the first time. What will happen in season 3? At the end of the third season, despite having their massive reputation, Warrington are staying loyal to manager Paul Carden. He has now lasted 3 seasons as boss. Looking at their key players, their club captain is Tunji Akinola. Their key player is now Tony Springett, and their hot prospect is Scott Barr. Looking in the top left-hand corner, Warrington are just not investing in their infrastructure. At this stage, after 3 seasons, they still have poor training facilities, basic youth facilities, fairly basic academy coaching, and basic youth recruitment. Looking at the finances in the club, we can see that the money has started to dry up. So they had those 2 big investments across the past 2 seasons, and then all of a sudden they were hit with debts, getting as far as £10 million in debt before they had another injection into the club, and they now have an overall balance of £8.7 million. Looking at the transfers that they would make, though, that could explain where some of the cash had gone, as they heavily invested in their playing squad. They would sign 9 permanent players. The biggest money they would spend would be on Charlie Webster, as they would purchase the Burton Albion player for £3.4 million. They would sign Kellen Watts from rivals Weymouth. They would pay Weymouth £3.3 million for him. They would also sign Scott Barr for $350,000, Alex Bannon for $145,000, and Jake Beasley for $125,000, spending a total of £7.5 million in season 3. And was it worth it? Of course it was. Warrington would go on to win the Vanarama National League and become the first of the 2 teams to break into the Football League. They would have an impressive 114 points from 46 games and only lose 2 across the season. You can see that Weymouth would finish in 2nd place. Let's have a look at what happened to them in season 3. At Weymouth, they too would stay loyal to original club manager Mark Molesley. He would last a 3rd season in charge at the club. Looking at their key players, their captain is now Dominic Gape. Their key player is Ryan Christie, and their hot prospect is Jorge Ortiz. Looking at their infrastructure, they invested in it in season 2. There are no advancements in season number 3. In terms of the finances at the club, we can see that they have also invested heavily in their playing squad. They would have a drop-off in cash until the end of the 26-27 season, when in June 2027 they would have another investment, and they would have an overall balance of £32.8 million. The investment in the playing squad would go primarily on a number of paid-for players. The most expensive player that they would purchase in this season would be Kem Campbell, with the Welshman coming in from Wolverhampton Wanderers. They would pay £4.3 million for him. They'd sign Andrew Moran from Brighton. They would pay $875,000 there. They would sign Alfie Dorrington from Tottenham, splashing out $625,000. They'd buy Darryl Dyke from West Brom for $550,000. Shogo Asada from Luton for $450,000. Ryan Christie from Bournemouth for $375,000. Dion Rankin from Wigan for $235,000. And they would sign a number of other players. One big name to look for at the bottom is Levin Kurosawa. He's a player who was formerly with the French national team. He is now dropped all the way down into the Vanarama National League to play for Weymouth. So was the investment worth it? We know that they finished 2nd in the Vanarama National League. And unfortunately for them, they would go into the playoffs, finishing runners-up to Warrington. In the semi-finals, they would beat Solihull Moors 4-0 and cruise into the final, where they would come up against Bromley and sadly lose 1-0. In season 3, it would be Warrington that won the Vanarama National League and become the first of the 2 teams to reach the Football League. Weymouth going close to promotion. Can they get over the line in season number 4? After 4 seasons, we find that Warrington are still being loyal to original club manager Paul Carden. At this point, their club captain is Femi Aziz. Their key player is Tony Springett. Their hot prospect is Matteo Easton. Looking in the top left-hand corner, is it a bit concerning that after 4 seasons they haven't spent a single penny investing in their infrastructure? Despite being a League 2 team, they still have poor training facilities and basic youth facilities. Looking at the finances at the club might give a little hint as to why they may not have been able to do that. So they started the season with a £9 million balance, and they would go as far as £11 million in debt before rising out to £38.9 million at the end of June of 2028. Hopefully, those big money sponsorship deals are still coming in due to the reputation score. They have a bank balance of £38.5 million. In season 4, they wouldn't invest heavily in their playing squad. They would only sign Sean McAllister from Coventry, and they would pay them £1.3 million. Despite their lack of investment in the playing squad, though, it would not harm them in their league form whatsoever, as Warrington would go on to be back-to-back champions, winning Sky Bet League 2 with 97 points from 46 games. They would win 29, draw 10, lose 7, and they are headed to League 1. Over at Weymouth, we would find that they are still being loyal to their club manager too, as Mark Molesley sees out season number 4 in charge. Looking at their key players though, Tyler Morton is now their club captain. He's also their key player. Their hot prospect is a 16-year-old centre-back called Jordan Shepherd. Looking in the top left-hand corner, another season without investment in their infrastructure, as they are probably trying to get out of the Vanarama National League before they build upon those things. Looking at the finances at the club then, they now have a balance of £75 million. When they started the season, they had £33 million, and they would drop off all the way to £7 million in debt before a massive £76 million was injected into the club, probably from a sponsorship deal. When we go forwards and have a look at what they did in the transfer market, so their biggest signing would be £2.8 million, which was Tom Cannon. They would sign him from Leicester. But when we look a little bit further down, we can see that they signed Tyler Morton, formerly of Liverpool, and they would even sign Junior Firpo, formerly of Barcelona and Leeds United. So they have invested in their playing squad. Was it worth their while doing so? It certainly was. They would be now going up into Sky Bet League 2 as champions. And look at the record they would have. 124 points, winning 40 of 46 games. In season 4, Warrington would be celebrating back-to-back promotions, and Weymouth would now be joining them in the Football League. Can they continue at this pace as we head into season 5? Season number 5 still sees no managerial changes at Warrington. Paul Carden still leads the team. In terms of their key players, Femi Aziz is still club captain. Abdallah Sima is now their key player. And the hot prospect is still Matteo Easton. Looking in the top left-hand corner, there seems to be a little bit of investment now in their infrastructure. Training facilities is up to basic, and their youth facilities is below average. Looking at the finances at the club, so once again, they would have £39 million at some points across the season. They would drop all the way down to £11 million in debt before once again having a big cash injection at the end of the season. Their overall balance going into season 6 will be £30.3 million. Looking at the investment in the playing squad though, for the first time they would spend big money. And by big money, we're talking £10 million or more, and a total of £22 million across the season. So the first player to come in would be Abdallah Sima. He would come from Ipswich Town, and they would pay £10.25 million to get him to League 1. The next player to come in would be Mark Stead. He's a new gen player that comes from Arsenal. They would pay £3.5 million for him. Luke Thomas would come in from Leeds United, and they would pay £3.2 million for him. They would sign Ellis Sims from Coventry. They would be paying £2.6 million for him. They'd buy Lee Kavanagh from Sunderland. They would pay a total of £1 million for him. They would also sign Charlie Sayers and David Ozo. And Luke Bell would come in on a free transfer. So once again, transfer policy, did it work out? It certainly did. They would end up finishing third in League 1. They would finish 7 points behind league winners Oxford and only 5 points behind an automatic promotion place. But it didn't matter, as they would go into the playoffs. In the semi-final, they would beat Reading 3-2 on aggregate, and then into the playoff final, they would gain promotion to the Championship by beating Barnsley. Over at Weymouth, Season 5 would see the first managerial casualty of the series. Mark Molesley would be relieved of his duties at the end of Season 5, and as of this point, they are still looking for a new manager. Looking at the key players at the club, Tyler Morton is the captain and the key player, and the hot prospect is still Jorge Ortiz. Looking in the top left, they seem to have invested a little more in their infrastructure. They now have a 2.5-star average training facility and a 2-star adequate youth facility. Looking at the finances at the club, Once again, they would start the season off with that £76 million balance, and they would drop off to £35 million before an end of season injection of cash once again leaves them on £51.8 million going into season 6. Looking at the transfers, well, there isn't any. They didn't buy a single player in the 5th season. Did that hold them back? No, it did not. They would go on and win Sky Bet League 2 to gain promotion into Sky Bet League 1. They would get 104 points, winning 32 of 46 games, have a goal difference of 40 and only taste defeat 6 times. Season number 5 would see Warrington reach the Sky Bet Championship. It would see Weymouth sack Mark Molesley and then reach League 1. And if you've reached this point of the video, please don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. I'm currently on the journey to 10,000 subscribers. I'd love to hit that number before the release of FM25 in March. Season number 6 would bring about the first managerial change at Warrington. Out would go Paul Carden and in comes Marino Pusic. Looking at their key players, their club captain is now Abdallah Sima, their key player is Luke Thomas, and their hot prospect is Mamadou Diatta. Looking in the top left-hand corner, we can still see that they haven't invested in their infrastructure despite being a championship team, still have basic training facilities and below average youth facilities. Looking at the finances at the club, they have now really become a yo-yo club in terms of the finances. So they had £31 million coming into the season. That would drop to £35 million in debt before they would climb out of it with more investment thanks to sponsorship deals. And they would go into season number 7 with £18.6 million. The other thing that would play a part in those debts is investing in the playing squad. They would buy a significant number of players for a significant amount of money, £26 million invested in players. Michael Smalley would be the biggest amount spent on a player. He has come from Bolton, a new gen worth £13.7 million. Tyreek George would move from Everton for £6.5 million. They'd sign Terry Taylor for 2.2. They would sign Sol Bryn from Weymouth, their rivals in this experiment, for £1.9 million. Dylan Smith, Mamadou Diatta, Carwyn Hewitt, Micah Hamilton and Andy Lyons in this championship season. Was it worth it? It actually was worth the gamble. So they would finish 6th in Sky Bet Championship. They would get 74 points from 46 games and they would actually qualify for the playoffs at the first time of asking. They would go into the semi-finals where unfortunately they would come up against Sheffield United and they would get knocked out in the semi-finals of the playoffs. Over at Weymouth in season 6, the first thing you'll notice is that they have put that reputation to good use as they take on Roberto De Zerbi as their manager. They have literally gone from Mark Molesley to Roberto De Zerbi. Looking at their key players then, they have Tyler Morton as their club captain. Rooney Bargy is currently on loan from Tottenham and he is their key player. And their hot prospect is Martin Altaf. Looking at their facilities, they haven't put too much more money into their infrastructure and it still looks pretty much the same as it was from previous seasons. In terms of finances though, they are a team that are now on top of the finances. And yes, they would have a big dip and go down to as little as 8.72 million. But once again, they're a team that flex their muscles financially, sign big sponsorship deals, and they have £79.1 million going into the next season. Let's have a look at what they did in the transfer market, and you can see that they are really now starting to lean on that reputation as they were able to sign players such as Claudio Echeverri from Manchester City. Yes, they are really pulling some strings. They have got Claudio Echeverri into League 1 and they paid £5.75 million for him. They would sign Eric Da Silva Moreira from Ipswich. They would pay £3.1 million for him. Nelson Abbey from West Ham. Oliver Arblaster from Bristol City for £1.8 million. They would sign Martin Altaf, who is their new hot prospect, for £375. And further down the list, Rooney Bargy would come in on loan from Tottenham. So it's absolutely crazy that Weymouth, who were a tiny reputation club, have got themselves into League 1 and now are really flexing their muscles with their reputation, signing some really good youth players for the long term. So did it help them get out of the division? It certainly did. Weymouth would get promoted from Sky Bet League 1 with 111 points. They would win 35 of 46 games, and they will be heading to the Championship. At the end of Season 6, Warrington would have their hearts broken in the playoffs, but now they've got to look over their shoulders as Weymouth join the party in the Championship. Who is going to win the race to the Premier League? Let's see what happens in Season 7. Season number 7 would see Warrington move into their brand new home. The Warrington Stadium would be built in 2030, has a capacity of 13,439, which is still a bit on the small side for a Championship club. The other thing you could see happening in Season 7 was there was another managerial change. Well, actually, there were a few. So, Sean Dyche is now the manager at the club, but after Marino Pusic was sacked, they took Michel on for 129 days, and then Sean Dyche has took over at this point. So, looking at the key players, you have Abdallah Simmer as both the captain and a key player, and the hot prospect now is Matthew Miller, a 20-year-old new-gen winger. Looking in the top left-hand corner, now we know that they have invested in their stadium, but they haven't invested in their training facility or their youth facility, which is a little bit worrying for a Championship side. Looking at the finances, they also have rode the wave of building the new stadium, at one point being £38 million in debt, but a big money injection at the end of the season would see them going into the new season with a £46.4 million transfer or overall balance. Looking at the transfer business that they did in Season 7, they would only spend £6.25 million. Now they've reached the Championship and built a stadium, they are lacking in terms of investing in their playing squad. Their most expensive player would be Manny Jevon. He's a new-gen player who would cost £5.75 million from Reading. They would also sign Matthew Miller from Tottenham, another new-gen player. He would cost £550,000. They'd sign Aidan Harris from Fulham, Tyler Hill from Accrington, and Christian Curran from Liverpool. So in terms of the Championship season for Season 7, we can't do this without giving a bit of a spoiler away. You can see that Warrington would finish in 14th place. They would only get 60 points and win 18 games from 46. Now, obviously, at the top, you can see straight away that Weymouth are the ones that win the race to the Premier League. So let's have a look at how they got there. Over at Weymouth, we still find Roberto De Zerbi in charge. Tyler Morton is still club captain. Levi Colwell is now their key player. Wayne Bird, a 21-year-old new-gen striker, is their hot prospect. Looking in the top left corner, they have now chose to go down the path of building their infrastructure. Their training facilities are a 3.5-star great facility, and their youth facility is a 3-star good facility. Looking at the finances then, they have 124 million overall in terms of a balance, and they have managed to avoid going into the red across the season and had a massive £134 million injected into the club at the end of the season. So impressive in terms of keeping the money. Did they invest in the playing squad? Yes, they did. So the biggest signing that they made was Rooney Bargy. They turned that loan deal at the end of last season into a permanent deal. They paid £36 million, and they, in the Championship, are paying Rooney Bargy £325,000 to secure his signature. They would also sign Caden Young from Aston Villa. He cost them £13 million. Dijon Kameri from Bournemouth for £3 million. Wayne Bird from Portsmouth for £1.4 million. Daniel Iverson from Sheffield Wednesday for £1.5 million. They would also pick up Max Kilman on a free transfer, Will Edwards on a free transfer, and they cashed in on the loans with players like Sver Naipan. They would also get Samuel Ritchie from Tottenham, Tobias Gullikson, and Rodrigo Gomez from Wolves. So obviously they heavily invested in the playing squad, 56 million spent, and it paid off. Every single penny was worth it. They would win the Championship and win the race to the Premier League with 88 points from 46 games, winning 26 of them. They have a team that could be dangerous now in the Premier League. With Warrington's season in the Championship seemingly stalling, Weymouth seized their opportunity to go above them and advance to the Premier League. Can Warrington join them in Season 8? Season number 8 would see another managerial change at Warrington, as we now find Russell Martin in charge of the team. Looking at the managers tab though, shows that Sean Dyche was sacked and replaced by Andoni Iraola, and 2 days ago he was sacked and replaced with Russell Martin. Looking at the infrastructure at the club, you can still see that they have the basic training facilities, the below average youth facilities. They are not able to invest in their infrastructure off the pitch to help them on the pitch. Looking at the finances, they have got into this routine of sliding into debt as far as £19.6 million this season, but then a big deal at the end of the season gets them out of the debts, and they have a bank balance of £20.9 million for the new season. Looking at the transfer business that they've done, they only spent £3.3 million. Billy Cometio is the biggest name that they signed. The former Liverpool defender would cost them £3.3 million from Dundee. They would also sign Luke Mackay, who is their new hot prospect goalkeeper from West Brom. And they would pick up Rodrigo Mora on a free transfer from Porto and Joe Williams from Fulham on a free transfer. Looking at that, it explains the reason that their championship season seems to have stalled, and they obviously swapped managers. A bit of financial mismanagement seems to be the reason that they can't get out of the championship. Once again, they would finish in 14th place with 63 points, 46 games played, 18 won, and a -5 goal difference. Means they're going to be stuck for another season in the championship. Over at Weymouth, Roberto De Zerbi is still the manager. Levi Colwill is now the club captain. Their key player is Fabio Vieira. Their hot prospect is an Italian called Fabio Faccin, who is a 19-year-old midfielder. Looking at their facilities, the club have got it spot on. They now have excellent training facilities and they have great youth facilities, obviously investing in their infrastructure and not building a brand new stadium, which is what Warrington seem to have made the mistake of doing. Looking at the finances at the club, they are now in absolute brilliant position in terms of their money. So they are not hitting debts at all, and after the £134 million bank balance from last season, they would go down to £10 million, but come the end of the season they would have a £201 million investment, putting them on an overall balance of £190 million for season number 9. Looking at their investment in the playing squad, they spent £119 million in this season. The biggest names that they would sign Tomiyasu. He has left Arsenal, gone to Atletico Madrid and has now joined Weymouth. They would spend £27 million on him. Francisco Cande is a goalkeeper who was signed for £16.75 million for Boa Vista. Samuel Ritchie made his loan move from Tottenham permanent, as did Tobias Gullikson. They would then sign Ben Boise from Arsenal for £9.5 million. Burak Kaplan from Basel for £11.25 million. Fabio Faccin came in from AC Milan. They'd signed Yuichiro Watanabe from Yokohama for £3.2 million. Frederick Orsnes from Atletico Madrid for £1.8 million. And then further down, look at some of these free transfers. Rodrigo Bentancur, even though he's now 34 years old, he will still do a great job. Isaac Simons is a new gen player that they got on a free transfer. And finally, they got Fabio Vieira, former Arsenal player, and then coming to them from Borussia Dortmund for free. So they have built themselves a fantastic squad for the Premier League, and it would end up with them finishing in 8th place. They would finish on 58 points and only win 16 games from 38. Finishing in 8th would put them into the Europa Conference League spots. They would finish miles behind Manchester City, but for a first time in the Premier League, they are definitely a team on the up. Warrington are struggling in the Championship. Weymouth are flying in the Premier League. What will happen in season number 9? Season number 9 would once again see a managerial change at the Warrington Stadium, as Neil Harris is now in charge of the team. Looking at the managers tab shows that Russell Martin would only last 175 days in the job before he was replaced with Neil Harris. Looking at the key players, you can see now we're at the stage where the new gens are really starting to take over. Their club captain is Scott Barr, their key player is Gary Warnock, and their hot prospect is Michael Doyle. Looking at the top left-hand corner, there is still no real improvement in their infrastructure. Their training facilities are still basic, and their youth facilities are below average. That could really be one of the key areas that is holding them back. Looking at the finances, that shows off another area that's holding them back too. So they keep having the big cash injections, and then they will get themselves in massive debts, only to get themselves back out of the debt by flexing their muscles in terms of their reputation and signing big deals to get themselves out of trouble. 61 million they have going forwards into the new season. In the current season, they would spend £12.25 million. The majority of that would go on Gary Warnock, who is obviously their new key player. He would cost them £7.75 million from Southampton. They would also sign Bradley Lamb, Logan McLean, Alexei Fedorchenko, Gareth Edwards and Daniel Murphy on permanence, as well as Christopher Bonsu-Barr and Damien Tangen on a loan deal. So, were the investments any good? Did they get themselves out of the Championship? The answer is no. They still would finish in 12th place. 61 points this time from 46 games, only 17 wins, and a -1 goal difference means it's another season in the Championship. Over at Weymouth, Roberto De Zerbi is still in charge of the club at the end of season 9. The big news for this season, though, is that due to the fact they qualified for the Europa Conference League, Weymouth are now having to ground share with Bournemouth, who recently built their brand new stadium in 2029 called the Eddie Howe Park. Their capacity is 23,000 and that is adequate for European competitions. Looking at the key players, you can see Levi Colwill is still the club captain. Their key player is Philip Vincent Day. Their hot prospect is a Swiss national called Burak Kaplan. Looking in the top left-hand corner, they have got it absolutely spot on in terms of investing in their infrastructure. They now have 5-star state-of-the-art training facilities and 4.5-star superb youth facilities. Looking at the finances around the club, we can see that they have had big investments in the club, but they also at certain points dropped down to as little as £4 million. Not going into any debt, and they would clear £241 million at the end of the season. Now, obviously, the reputation of the club would bring in sponsorship deals, but qualifying for European competitions would also add to that money pot. Looking at the investments in the playing squad, then they would spend £167 million in their quest to move up the Premier League. Most expensive signing was Luciano Rodriguez. He would come from Brighton. He would cost £54 million. Philip Vincent Day is a new gen that would come from Aston Villa. He was £34.5 million. They would sign Jacob Ramsey, also from Aston Villa. He would cost £21.5 million. Malo Gusto would come from Everton, who is in game. He would cost £21.5 million as well. Brennan Johnson would move to the club from Tottenham for 14.75. Roger Ibanez moved from Arsenal for 12.25 million. And Keira Bolokbasi, he would come to the club as a new gen player from Besiktas for £8 million. So they've had heavy investment in the playing squad. Did it do them any good? Well, in terms of their Premier League position, it actually didn't. They took a step back. They moved to 13th in the league. They only got 45 points from 38 games, won 11, lost 15, had a -4 goal difference. But, as you can see, they have qualified for the Europa League. And they did that because they would go on and win the Europa Conference League. They would get all the way to the final where they would play against Real Sociedad. And they would win the UEFA Europa Conference League. It's absolutely crazy that they're the first team to reach the Premier League, and they have become the first team to win a European competition with a massive reputation. Going into the final season, Warrington are still looking for that magic spark to get them to the Premier League, whereas Weymouth look like they could be challengers for the Premier League and the Europa League in Season 10. It's the 10th and final season, and once again, we see that Warrington have changed their manager. Graham Potter is now the man in charge at the club. Looking at the managers tab shows that Neil Harris would last 260 days before he was sacked and replaced by Graham Potter. For the final season, their club captain would be Gary Warnock, their key player would be Bonsu-Barr, and their hot prospect would be Michael Doyle. Looking at the top left-hand corner of the screen shows that for the 10th and final season, they have now decided to start investing in their infrastructure. Is it 10 years too late? It possibly is. They now have 3.5-star great training facilities and 3-star youth facilities. despite them being in the Championship for a number of seasons. Look at the finances at the club, you can see they seem to have been a bit more stable this time around. No massive debts of note. They would go £6 million in debt, but that's nowhere near the 37 they were before. And once again, using their reputation to build themselves a bank balance of £32.5 million going into the final season. Looking at the players they would sign in the final season then, Spike Brits would be the biggest name, the young goalkeeper coming to them for £13 million. Kareem Jack would join from Stockport. My gosh, tattoos on the face. New gens. Great pack, but he has had a hard knock life, it seems. Kareem Jack will cost $7.25 million from Stockport. They would sign Paolo Sebastiani from Inter Milan. He would join for $2.7 million. Ordi and Goma would join from Wolves. They'd sign Tom Forbes, Nathan Asimwe, Ollie Scholes, Dylan Berry, Marley Crawford would join from Manchester United. So with that investment in the playing squad of £25 million, they still can't get out of the Championship, and they would finish the final season of the experiment in 12th place. They've risen from the Vanarama National North all the way up to the Championship, and then really struggled once they got there. They finished the final season on 66 points from 46 games, only winning 18 of those games. Over at Weymouth, we find Roberto De Zerbi is still in his job, and he has overseen the 10th and final season of the Save. The other thing to note here is Weymouth have moved themselves into a brand new stadium, built in 2032, 23,000 capacity stadium called the Hassan Al-Badwawi Stadium, and the chairperson decided to name it after himself. So, the key players at the club for the final season: Levi Colwell will be the club captain. The key player is Philip Vincent Day, and their hot prospect is still Fabio Fachin. Looking at their facilities now, they have really put all their money into their infrastructure. They have state-of-the-art training facilities and state-of-the-art youth facilities. Looking at the money that is available to the club, they have an overall balance of 146 million, and they really have got to grips with managing the finances at the club, and they have been using their worldwide reputation to garner themselves some really big deals in terms of financial incomes. Looking at the outgoings for players in the final season, they would spend £92 million. They would make the loan move of Sver Hausan Noipan into a permanent deal for £50 million. And he is a player that obviously will propel them forward in future seasons. They would sign David Adair from Cardiff. He is an attacking fullback. £26 million for him. Matteo Vicario. He is a player that comes from Benfica for $7.75 million. David Perez Gutierrez comes from Barcelona's youth team for $4.2 million. Demetrius comes from Vasco da Gama for $3.8 million. And Lautaro Gonzalez comes for $650,000. So, with all that massive investment in the playing squad, where did they finish in the final season? They would only finish in 10th place. Slightly disappointing that they're building this massive squad, gaining all of these financial income revenues, and still can't trouble the top of the Premier League. They would get 55 points. They would win 14 of 38 games in the final season. They would finish in 10th place. Having tracked both teams across 10 seasons, I found it really interesting to see how the two of them did things very, very differently. Warrington went out hard early, invested in the playing staff, built themselves a new stadium, but left their training facilities and their youth facilities as one star all the way into the Championship. And that could be one of the reasons that they stagnated once they got there. They put all their eggs in one basket and really didn't build that infrastructure for when they needed it. Whereas Weymouth kind of went a steady approach where they did invest in players early on, but they were also building that infrastructure behind the scenes to get them into the position that when they broke into the Championship and the Premier League, they were already in a place where, even though they didn't have a massive stadium, they were getting the income through the sponsorship deals, didn't really need the ticket sales, but they built those training facilities and the youth facilities so they could get the best out of their players across the 10 seasons. So to see Warrington get stuck in the Championship for so long was a little bit disappointing, but to see Weymouth break into the Premier League, finish 8th at their highest and win the Conference League really was something that was an eye-opener in terms of the way that when clubs really get these big reputations, they should probably go about their business. Right then, if you've enjoyed today's video, please don't forget to leave a like on the video. Also, subscribe to the channel. As I said earlier, I'm on the path to 10,000 subscribers. Really love to hit that target before the release of Football Manager 2025 in March. Thank you for watching. I'll see you on another video very soon.